Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pharmacy for the People, where I try to put your health back into your hands by breaking down complex medication issues into bite-sized morsels. My name's James. I'm a licensed practicing pharmacist. And if you're new here, if you enjoy what we go through today, consider subscribing to the channel and then sending this video to someone that you think would also find it helpful. Today is part 3 in my How to Do Your Research tirade. If you've watched parts 1 and 2, then you know this whole series was born out of the trend of people yelling, "Do your research!" instead of offering a civil, rational argument in a debate. So for fun, we're applying "do your research" to pharmacy and medical issues. We took a look in part 1 talking about how to follow information to its source. And then in part 2, we looked at how to look at the quality, not just the quantity, of medical literature. And today, we are working on a topic that I have been excited about for months because I am a massive nerd. Whether you're watching a presidential debate, hotly contesting an idea on social media, watching an opinion-based news show, or even just sharing ideas around a campfire, these mistakes that we're about to talk about are the single easiest way to miss pulling the idea train into the right conclusion station. We're talking about logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are pitfalls in rhetoric. Now, this channel is not devoted to rhetoric. This is Pharmacy for the People. But logical fallacies affect our lives in nearly every way, including how we make medical decisions. And recently, amidst the pandemic and the war being waged on information itself, logical fallacies and rhetoric have had an immense impact on our daily lives, including our medical decision-making. So I'm taking a step back for just a second from our medical complexity topics, and we're going to talk about this element of disillusion today and how it affects our pursuit of health. But I'll keep it short and sweet because even though this matters, it's not strictly speaking a pharmacy topic. That being said, logical fallacies are errors in the way that we form or defend an argument. They either accidentally or intentionally serve to derail the argument itself. Now, these concepts dated back to the Greeks with the advent of rhetoric itself and debate, but it's so much a part of our daily lives that we don't even recognize its impact. So many of our savage, primal disputes on social media are typically just endless volleys of back and forth smacks of logical fallacies against logical fallacies, and it's not well-conceived arguments, and they're rarely headed for an amicable or even useful end. Let's quickly move on to examples, but before I do, I want to warn you, I'm going to pull a lot of examples from politics because they make it so easy. But I am neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I intend to be an equal opportunity exposer of logical fallacies as we move through today, regardless of their platform or party. So, please do not infer my beliefs from the examples that I use. Or do, whatever, I don't care. Okay, so imagine watching a political debate when one of the opponents says, "Well, I think that my opponent's plan for our schools is simply illegitimate." And the other one interjects really quickly and he says, "You are such a liar. You don't know anything about schools. I know everything about schools because I've read books. Besides, who would vote for you? Look at your face. Who would vote for that face?" The example I just read contains a few logical fallacies, but I want to focus in on this very classic and VIP of 2020, the ad hominem fallacy. This translates from Greek as the to the person fallacy, and instead of responding to the conclusions being presented, you attack the person directly. My example was from politics. It was real and it was blazing. I altered it a little bit so you wouldn't immediately know who said it. But aside from just making you sound like Dennis Feinstein, attacking someone's appearance instead of engaging the issue is a flagrant ad hominem fallacy. Okay, different example. Imagine you're having a conversation and you say, "I think if we had smarter stoplights, it would save time and lives." Someone walks up next to you and says, "Oh, that's rich," coming from someone who never drives the speed limit. Now, you can see how that might first seem like it's a legitimate retort, but in reality, they bypass the topic of stoplights and they're going right at your character. Now, instead of talking about stoplights, they're talking about whether or not you are suited or fit to discuss the topic of traffic. We need better stoplights, but that's not the point. Something more topical. Imagine you hear somebody say, I don't think that masks actually protect anybody from anything. You say, you only care about yourself, and masks can't save anybody from your selfishness. Ad hominem. You're not actually addressing the topic of whether or not the masks work or help. You're talking about the person's character. Now, hopefully from these last two examples, you can see just how easy it is to miss a logical fallacy when it's presented in an argument, especially if the attack uses accurate information, because you feel the immediate need to defend from the attack instead of staying on topic. Your emotions rush to defend you, and your topic gets lost in a Walmart parking lot. Whether done intentionally or accidentally, logical fallacies are sometimes referred to as intellectual dishonesty because they may end the argument or a debate, but it's not because you win, it's because you've broken down the process so that you never actually arrive at the right end. You've steamrolled the topic with underhanded tactics. Okay, next up, the straw man fallacy. One of my favorite comedians, Brian Regan, had a really funny example of this. He talked about seeing a campaign ad on TV that said, "He voted to tase middle schoolers," framing this thing as if the politician had this crazed idea of tasing middle schoolers to get his jollies, instead of the reality where he had voted to establish a policy where you could use a taser to prevent higher escalated forms or worse measures of de-escalating violence. So the straw man fallacy is where you take the real argument and you reframe it to make it an easier thing to target, an easier target to attack. You take the real argument and you make it a ridiculous version of itself. A very current example in medicine right now is referring to ivermectin, a medication that some people are using to treat COVID-19 simply as horse dewormer. Ivermectin is used to deworm horses, but it also has other indications in humans. The issue is far more complex than that. And even though there's no substantial evidence suggesting that ivermectin reduces the severity of COVID-19 in people, simply saying that people are taking horse medicine for COVID is a straw man fallacy. I'm not endorsing ivermectin for COVID-19. At the time that I'm recording this right now, the evidence supporting ivermectin is low quality and highly suspect. But that's not the point. Don't lose me here. The point is that logical fallacy is everywhere, and rephrasing someone's position to make it easier to attack is the straw man fallacy. Regardless of your motives. People aren't taking ivermectin because it's a horse dewormer. They're taking it in hopes of treating COVID-19, albeit misguided until larger studies can establish that it actually works. Okay, different example. Let me move away from something that might be triggering some people. It's clear to me that we need to prioritize our schools and our education efforts for the sake of our country's future. Oh, so you hate firemen and police and you want to get rid of them altogether? Straw man fallacy. We've all heard loaded questions before in our lives. Sometimes they're insidious, sometimes they're blatant, but they're always full of pretext and assumption. So, you still beating your wife? You see how the question assumes that you abuse your wife? Unless the point has already been established previous to that point, the question makes an assumption that has not been established yet. It's intended for you to assume guilt. So whether you answer yes or no, the assumption that you abuse your wife still stands uncorrected. You see that? It's a trap. Or how about something from politics? How many more mass shootings have to happen before you're willing to acknowledge that we need better gun control? Do you see how the question assumes both that gun control is lacking and that it's responsible for mass shootings? Now, I'm not taking a stance on this by pointing that out. I'm simply showing that both of those, unless they've been prior established somewhere else, it's an assumption with the intent of implying guilt. A loaded question. When did you first decide to cover up alien encounters at Area 51? Zach Galifianakis uses loaded questions in his show Between Two Ferns as a joke. Intentionally underhanded phrasing like, you've played a lot of different people on the silver screen. Have you ever considered playing someone who's taken acting lessons? Loaded questions. Hilarious as a device, no place in an actual debate. Oh boy. Special pleading is a real booger. It's really easy to commit, and it's typically a signal that you're not actually about what's right or fair, but you're about what benefits you at the moment. Special pleading is some sort of double standard. So think about a football game. One team throws the football into the end zone, catches it, and they're like, yay, we made a touchdown. And then the opposing team throws the football into the end zone, catches it, and the first team's like, no, you can't do that. We changed the rules. Now you can only run it in. No, catching it's only for us. Yeah, sorry. Special pleading. You've changed the rules to benefit you in the moment. A really funny application of this is in philosophy. Something that's really popular is we like to say that morality is relative, and it's up to each individual. But we only say that when we don't want people to tell us what to do. But when somebody breaks into your car and steals your radio, your laptop, and 3 months worth of McDonald's trash, you want immediate objective justice, not relative justice. We want someone to look and say, yes, this is wrong, not, I don't know. Morality is either subjective or objective. We can't choose which one we want it to be in the moment that it benefits us the most. Here's one that is sure to make a bunch of people mad at me. How about the group of people who are staunchly anti my body, my choice when it's applied to abortion, but staunchly pro my body, my choice when it's about masking and vaccinations? That's special pleading. So being in favor of an ideal when it benefits you personally, but not in favor of that ideal when you don't like how it's being applied, is special pleading. Bandwagon fallacy. Most of us are well acquainted with this one, but did you know that it's a logical fallacy to use the popularity of an opinion to justify its rightness? Popularity of a conclusion is never suitable evidence that a conclusion is correct. I feel like I don't even need to give examples of this, but I will. Ads flaunt this fallacy. Everybody loves the clean scent of our soap. 9 out of 10 people love the taste of crunch bone gum. Literally everyone in the whole world who matters already has these shoes. If you want to matter, you have to buy them too. Or in politics, everybody knows you're a liar. Everybody agrees with me. This is bandwagoning. It's not an honest argument. It preys on your desire to fit in with everybody. Okay, here's one that you might not be familiar with. The burden of proof fallacy, or shifting the burden of proof, is really common in casual debates, but it's had a growing impact on how our culture conducts its pursuit of truths recently. Generally, the rule in rhetoric or debate or even jurisprudence law is that the one who makes the claim bears the burden of proving that claim. There are some exceptions to this rule, like if the claim is a well-established idea, but the opponent demands proof or supporting evidence of that well-established idea, then the burden of proof is on the person demanding the proof. The logical fallacy is when the claim is made and the onus of proof is placed on the opponent. For example, the sun is nothing more than a government object put in the sky to control our sleep. And if you can't prove me wrong, you have to accept that. No, the burden of proof in this situation is on the person claiming crazy things, not the opponent to disprove. On the other hand, if someone were to say, cows are mammals who eat grass, not robot vampires who eat the souls of children, and somebody were to respond, you have to prove that because I don't believe you, even though the first person actually made the claim, the second person has the burden of proof in that scenario, because the idea that cows are mammals made of meat is a well-established idea. In medicine, the burden of proof to claim that a medication is both safe and effective falls on the developers, which is why they go through the FDA to meet that burden of proof before they can market their substance. A person, product, or company that wants to claim effect without first meeting that burden of proof should not be trusted. In politics, this one was also really in vogue in 2020. especially regarding fraud. There were claims made about the fidelity of the voting system, but the burden of proof was frequently shifted onto the opponent to disprove. Everybody knows that there was fraud. You have to prove that there wasn't fraud. See how I slipped in that bandwagon on top of that? Huh? You like that? Don't miss the burden of proof fallacy. It can be very easy to bait you into trying to establish something or prove something that's not your responsibility in a debate or an argument. Keep that burden of proof where it belongs. The red herring fallacy is one that you've perhaps heard of before or just heard the phrase red herring, but not known what it was in reference to. Legend has it that when training certain kinds of hunting dogs, the method to test the success of the training was to put the dog in the field with the mark and also a red herring, a pungent delicacy to these dogs, at the same time. And if the dog could hone in on the mark without getting distracted by the fish, then they were ready for a real hunt. It's basically the equivalent of telling a college student to go and study when there's an Xbox and a Red Bull right there. And the same thing is true in a debate. A red herring fallacy is providing irrelevant information in order to throw an opponent off the trail of the question. Politicians love to use this one as a get out of the question free card. Senator, why did you vote to defund schools when education is suffering so intensely in your state? Oh, I'm no stranger to suffering. My wife and I spend a lot of time in orphanages in Mozambique, and the suffering there is intense. You see how that's phrased like it's a response, but it's not actually related at all to what the question was? Sir, would you consider yourself to be spiritual? I have a great relationship with God, but look at my golf courses. I have the most beautiful golf courses in all the world, and I built those. I'm an amazing builder. But you can't compare with God. Red herring. That information is entirely irrelevant. Or, honey, did you take the trash out today? Oh, sweetie, you should have heard what the neighbors were yelling at each other today. It's unrelated. It's a red herring. It's an obvious get out of trouble play. The appeal to emotion fallacy. Now, there are a lot of fallacies that focus on appealing to something. The appeal to emotion is the attempt to engage emotion to override the reason. It's a general category for the appeal to fear, the appeal to anger, the appeal to pity, etc., etc. Typically, there's a claim, a emotional anecdote, and then a call to action of some sort. It's like a Trojan horse, basically. They're making it look one way on the outside, but they're really just using it to get a conclusion inside the gate. Something like, we should close down all schools. You should have seen the boy that I spoke to. He told me about the relentless bullying that he suffered when he was there, and the kind of impact that it had on his mind and his heart from there on. We need to get our kids out of school and back outside playing where they belong. Claim, emotional anecdote, call to action. But you can replace that middle part with a lot of different things that play on different emotions, like, close all schools. When are we finally going to put an end to the callous actions of teachers filling our children with rebellion and hate and liberal agendas? We have to close all schools. Do we really know what teachers are saying in there? Teachers can say whatever they want. The government is trying to steal our children with their laws and their standards. Feeling an emotional response is not a validation for a claim, even if it does make you want to adopt 30 dogs. Thanks, Sarah McLaughlin. But our emotions are very powerful determiners of our response, so pay attention for this one. If you suspect that there's an appeal to emotion taking place, take a couple deep breaths. See if you're just being drawn in a certain direction or if someone is making a claim with supporting evidence. I think I've covered the causation-correlation fallacy well in other videos, but the bottom line is that the correlation between two things does not establish a causal relationship between those two things. In Latin, it's called post hoc ergo propter hoc. Imagine somebody saying, it's hot in the summer, children play a lot in the summer, children generate heat from their bodies when they play a lot, therefore, the reason that it's hot outside in the summer is because kids play outside too much. Or, I paused in the middle of my nightly lard buffet to take a medication that was supposed to decrease my cholesterol and I had a heart attack. Ergo, cholesterol medications give you heart attacks. The economy is much better this month since I started telling everyone my opinion. Ergo, me telling everyone my opinion makes the economy better, and I'm right. You see the pattern. You have to establish causality, but with reproducibility. It's not just happenstance, not just one-off, but again and again and again and again. Test it. One that keeps popping up in the ICU where I work is that people are refusing ventilators, which is their right, but they're doing it because they believe that ventilators are killing people, not the insatiable virus that turn their lungs into whatever you get after you put a puppet in a wood chipper. But I can see the line of reasoning, right? You know somebody, they get sick, they get admitted to the hospital, they get put on a ventilator, and then suddenly they die while they're on the ventilator, and you make the correlation between dying and the ventilator. But correlation does not mean causation. Severe COVID destroys lungs and causes them to cease to work on their own. One way to prevent imminent death from not breathing is to put you on a ventilator that will put that air into your lungs even when they're not working well. If your lungs heal, then great. But most of the time, correlation does not mean causation. The appeal to nature fallacy is really similar to the appeal to emotion fallacy, but instead of pulling on your heartstrings, it tries to get you to bend your knee to Mother Nature herself. Natural is one of the most powerful buzzwords in our culture right now. It subconsciously sways us to buy something or believe something, even without supporting evidence. If it's natural, it means good. But something being natural should never elevate it over something that has better supporting evidence, right? Just because you have an all-natural pillow made out of burlap and corn husk doesn't mean that it's going to give you better sleep than a synthetic memory foam pillow. There are large groups of people that won't take medications because they believe that they are toxic chemicals, but flock to a natural substance that contains the same active ingredient as in those toxic medications. Most medications are directly derived or indirectly derived from plants, animals, fungus, bacteria, etc., etc. They are naturally occurring substances that have just been purified into a singular form. But without the magical buzzword of natural, it's not good enough. This is largely the result of a big appeal to nature fallacy that's being marketed to our wallets, not our minds. We want nothing to do with dihydrogen monoxide, but we want pure water for our bodies. Don't use the harsh chemical ascorbic acid. Are you crazy? Use natural rosehip oil instead. I don't feel like I need to belabor this. Arsenic is natural and it's deadly. Poop is gross and it's natural. The air we breathe is a chemical and it keeps our hearts pumping. Look for the evidence, not a buzzword. Oh yeah, first they say you have to wear your seatbelt, but before you know it, you'll have to put on pads and a helmet and you'll have to lick some politician's butt before you can drive a car. The slippery slope fallacy suggests that if action A is allowed to take place, then outcome Z is inevitable. It's not a logical fallacy to say that A leads to B if you have supporting evidence that links A to B, like drinking and driving leads to deaths, overuse of antibiotic causes bacterial resistance, not eating food causes starvation. A leads to B. But the logical fallacy is when there's not direct supporting evidence to say that A actually leads to Z. It can be subtle sometimes because it usually capitalizes on what's feared to happen. It capitalizes on an already existing fear. So if you're emotional or afraid or angry of an outcome, a slippery slope fallacy could more easily entangle you. For instance, if I were to say, if you give sugar to a newborn, they're just going to want more and more and crave it until they end up being fat and sick. Do you see how the outcome there is possible, but it's not necessarily probable? There are many steps along that pathway that could cause that outcome to change. It's not a direct link from A to Z. And it typically always has that element of exaggeration and fear built into it. Like if someone were to say, those who are unvaccinated against SARS-CoV-2 are more likely to get severely sick and die, so if we don't vaccinate every man, woman, and child, everybody is going to die. Well, no, you can't say that. You could say that the unvaccinated are more likely to get more severely sick, or more of the unvaccinated are likely to die, but to say that they will all die does not follow the premise. In politics, it's basically like a mad gab at this point. You could say, if we let these get this bill through the Senate and take our they'll never stop. They'll take everything that we love. Slippery slope. Avoid the temptation to exaggerate and calm down doomsday, and you'll typically avoid using the slippery slope fallacy. The appeal to ignorance is another really common one, and it is the bastion of conspiracy theorists and bias everywhere. It is the stepbrother to the burden of proof fallacy, and together these two can establish any idea you want to. Because we can't definitively prove that the government didn't fake the moon landing, we have to accept that they did. Because we can't definitively prove that the government did fake the moon landing, we have to accept that they didn't. You see how the diametrically opposed conclusions are supported by the same evidence, the same lack of evidence? All the lack of evidence proves is that we don't have evidence. It cannot be used as supporting evidence. But if you slap a burden of proof fallacy right next to this one, then you will argue yourself blue for something that's not your responsibility with absolutely no evidence. It's a huge waste of time. Like I said, there are a lot of these. Most of them have really fun names, and they're worth learning because of the way that they affect our lives, like the black and white fallacy that suggests that the truth is either A or B, when in fact there are many other options, like A2 and a B5, etc., etc. Or begging the question, where you use circular logic to establish a point, like the earth is flat because all earths are flat. The anecdotal fallacy, using an anecdote to suggest a broad reality, like my brother got sick from chicken, therefore I know chicken makes everybody sick. The appeal to common folk or common sense, cherry picking, two wrongs make a right, sunk cost fallacy, false equivalence, etc., etc. I'm going to leave some really fun resources in the description below so that you can keep reading about this stuff if you're as big a nerd as I am. But I've got to cut this video short, otherwise it will never end. But before I stop, we have to talk about one final really important fallacy. The fallacy. Just because someone includes a logical fallacy in their argument does not necessarily mean that their conclusion is wrong. Conspiracy theorists say that the earth is flat and nothing good can come from the conspiracy theorists, so obviously they're wrong. This person is using the genetic fallacy, suggesting that just because of information source means that it's either right or wrong. If an opponent were then to say, well, you just committed the genetic fallacy, ergo all earths are flat, well, then they would be committing the fallacy. Beyond just being funny and pretty difficult to keep straight in your mind, I saved this one for last as a reminder that learning and pointing out logical fallacies does not actually serve as an argument or an establishment of truth. This is just so that we can avoid potholes and distractions in our pursuit of truth. After all, the point is not perfectly framed arguments. The point is honest debate that ends in honest conclusion. So let me wrap all this up. What do I want you to take from this? Logical fallacies come in many shapes and sizes, but they can be summed up as mistakes or dishonesty while debating a conclusion. This is Pharmacy for the People, where my goal is to arm you with what you need to overcome the powers of medical complexity and disillusionment. So when someone is trying to convince you that a product is a safe and effective treatment or prevention of something, ask them how they know. And then as you're listening to their conclusions, listen to their arguments too. Are they being honest in their arguments, or are they just trying to coerce you into doing what they want you to do using dishonest methods? I'm not trying to stir up gotcha moments between people, just good faith investigations. I also want you to consider your own arguments and debates. Do you use honest arguments when you're having a debate? Insecurity shows itself quick when we stoop to dishonest gain instead of just admitting ignorance or error. That's a difficult bridge to cross no matter who you are. We don't have to be keepers of all knowledge, but it shows integrity to recognize our own shortcomings. So I don't want you to just learn these to defeat your enemies, but also to recognize your own mistakes and choose to debate as honestly as possible. Integrity is more important than being right. Lastly, as we're continuing down the path of do your research into our last episode of Cognitive Biases, I'd like you to take just a second and consider something that you believe and then the kind of evidence that you'd be willing to accept to change that belief. Just for funsies. Doesn't have to be anything big. Just consider it. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for your time and your patience, and hopefully now you're just a little bit more prepared to face the debate. Remember to ask your questions and leave comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to let me know. Thank you again for watching, and power to the people. Is my microphone still on? Yes, it is.